Good morning, Dr. Kuria.
Good morning, Razila. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Welcome and karibu sana. I know it's so early for you.
Not too much. It's just 5 a.m.
Okay, karibu sana. Hello, Wahu Kahara. How are you? You're muted, Wahu.
I am here.
Good to see you.
And I'm very happy for this invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for honoring our invitation.
Quite a celebration, quite a celebration.
Exactly. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
All right.
Are we sure the translation is not working for the French colleagues from West Africa? Do we have any from West Africa who have joined us yet? It's early for them as well.
Yes, it's early. Thank you for that. But I think we need to do a test, Sarah. Are the interpreters in now? All of them?
Rosina, sorry. Yeah, let's try to test, but they're in.
Okay. Do you have anybody from West Africa already? In? I don't see anybody from West Africa yet. Our interpreters, can you hear us loud and clear? That's Caroline.
Yes, good afternoon. I can see it's already midday. So
right.
we are waiting to be assigned as interpreters, but we are ready.
Okay. You are together with, is it Ibrahim?
We are with Michael.
With Michael, sorry. You're together with Michael. Great.
Yes.
Okay. So once we see participants from West Africa region, we'll do a test just to confirm that the interpretation is working. So let's just give a few minutes. I can see people logging in one by one. Let's just give a few minutes so that at least if we reach about 22, we could begin. Hello, Beauty, how are you?
I'm fine, Dr. Rosilla. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Do we have any of your other women colleagues joining?
No, let me check with them.
Thank you. Welcome, Alia. Nice to have you here. And all the participants. I can see most of our speakers are in. Thank you, Co-Chair Nagiba, for joining, Co-Chair of the African Women of Faith Network. I can see all our speakers are in, and most of the Women of Faith Network members are also in, and some of our the religious leaders too, the SGs. Let's just give one more minute, dear participants, then we shall begin. Thank you for your patience. We also recognize UN Women. Saro is one of our panelists. Thank you for joining in the meeting. Sarah, do you have anybody from West Africa as yet? I can see Therese struggling to join.
Yeah, I can see some members from Nigeria.
Yeah, Halimat, okay.
I think also considering it could be quite early for West Africa, but we believe they'll be able to join us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So once again, good afternoon from Nairobi, Kenya, and good morning from wherever you're logging in. We thank you for accepting our invitation to attend this webinar, which is very, very important at this moment, at this day, on this day, and at this particular time. So without much ado, I just wish to mention to you that this webinar has been organized by the African Council for Religious Leaders, Religions for Peace. I will be moderating some sessions of this particular webinar, and my name is Rosilla Adhiambo. I work at the African Council for Religious Leaders as the regional advisor for the Integral Human Development Program. I just want at this particular moment, we move straight to the opening and framing based on the program we shared with you, and mentions of other people who are participating in this particular webinar. I will do it as we continue. So at this particular juncture is my opportunity and great honor to invite our Secretary General, Dr. Francis Kuria, who is joining us in this webinar from New York. He's the Secretary General of ACRL and the Secretary General for Religions for Peace. Thank you very much, Dr. Kuria, for joining us very, very early in the morning from your end. So I invite you now to take over the first session, which is reflections and opening remarks. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosilla. I request that that we start this meeting with a moment of silence to reflect on the sacred, on our Creator, whoever you consider them to be, and to give yourself a chance to bring yourself before His power and strength, and to seek His guidance as we start this meeting. A moment of silence, please. Thank you very much. I wish, first of all, to welcome all the participants to this webinar. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And we also want to hope that you will be uplifted by these discussions. But we also want to hope that we'll have more people, especially from West Africa, joining. The African Council of Religious Leaders has a big constituency across Africa, and we hope that this will be reflected in the attendance of this webinar today, because we need to give due credence and importance to the issue of the International Women's Day, and also the agenda of women empowerment and gender equality. And as in the Secretariat of the African Council of Religious Leaders are committed to this agenda. Today's webinar, every year we do organize these celebrations to commemorate and bring forth the importance of the International Women's Day, and I'm very happy that we are joined by Meriwa Wahukara, a global social justice activist, who is going to be speaking to us for her experiences and proximity to the agenda of women empowerment and their role in ensuring that gender equality is achieved. I'm also very happy to see Ms. Sunita Kaminha, the regional policy specialist of UN Women SRO, who is going to be speaking to us. Ms. Mildred Ngesa, who we have been in the trenches for quite some time, is a transformational leadership coach and media specialist, and we are very happy to see you. We are also very happy to see Estela Sabiti from Femwise, and thank you so much for joining us. Our own Alia Lal Mohammed, a member of the Global Gender Equality Commission, and also a member of the Youth Network, the Africa Interfaith Youth Network, and the Council of Mauritius. We are so happy for these stakeholders. We are also hoping that later, I don't know if she has joined us there, that the co-chair of the Africa Women of Faith Network, Sister Agatha Chekeule, will be here. But I am happy to see already that her co-chair, Najiba Hassan, is already here to participate in this webinar. We are very grateful for all the speakers who have come to look at the progress made in achieving gender equity and women empowerment, and reflect on the key milestones in implementing the Beijing Platform of Action and related frameworks that are there to assist our women to rise and shatter whatever ceilings is holding them back to engage fully in the socioeconomic development of Africa. We are very keen that this discussion being within the framework of faith, we look at how we can strengthen faith-based contributions to gender equality. I believe that there are many things that religious leaders, including women religious leaders, can do to achieve gender equality, including working on male masculinity. We just developed a new strategic plan which emphasized that for women empowerment, we need to emphasize on positive masculinity and how men and women can work together to achieve gender equality, and how we can work to reduce societal violence, community violence, and violence in homes. We can reduce sexual and gender-based violence and all forms of violence in the home that are mechanisms to subjugate and intimidate women from achieving their goals, and how we can propose actionable recommendations moving forward, especially in bridging the gender leadership gap. How do we ensure that women get more opportunity for leadership? How do we ensure women get more opportunity for economic participation? As we celebrate, as we consider the Commission on Status of Women report here in New York, the issue of how do we skill women to better participate in the economic activities. We need to look at how women are being given opportunity for skills building, vocational training, so that they can participate fully in economic activities. But also, we have to look at one of the key drivers of disempowerment of women, which is the question of conflicts in Africa. Conflicts in Africa and elsewhere are a major reason for gender inequality. We know that in many conflict situations, women suffer from sexual and gender-based violence. Rape is very, very common in conflict situations, and the presence of women in peace building is a very important aspect of ensuring that the intersection of women leadership in conflict transformation, resilience building, and also one of the key drivers of conflicts, which is climate adaptation, is given center stage. How do we ensure that women are fully engaged in these areas? And I hope that our speakers will speak to these issues in a way that is going to be redemptive and look at the responsibilities of religious institutions and religious leaders, and to come up with actionable points and recommendations that the African Council of Religious Leaders, working with its national intelligence councils, we have 35 national intelligence councils across Africa. How do we ensure that those actionable recommendations reach the national intelligence councils and are translated into programmatic interventions for the purpose of uplifting our women to ensure gender equality and women empowerment is achieved. So this is a matter that is very close to the African Council of Religious Leaders and the Religions for Peace movement globally. Indeed, next week on 19th, we are going to have a major global webinar on this matter of women empowerment, especially the skilling of women for their economic participation, even as we look at Beijing Plus 30 and the status of women in the Commission on Status of Women, which is the 69th meeting of the Commission on Status of Women. So I welcome all of you, and I look forward to listening to all the experts that are present, and I hope that we can develop the actionable points that is going to ensure that Religions for Peace and the African Council of Religious Leaders is actually working on those key areas and those key recommendations that can cause transformation in uplifting the status of women and also deal with the challenges that they face regionally in Africa and globally as well. So thank you so very much for this, and thank you so all our speakers for coming and all our participants who are here in present. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Rosila Adhiambo, for the next step in this webinar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis Kuria, our Secretary General, for those opening remarks. And that actually sets us off for this particular webinar to take off. I wish now to invite Mary Wahu Kara, who the Secretary General has ably introduced. I will not say more about her because she has been ably described, but I want to mention the fact that Wahu Kahara is going to share with us insights around the realization of the Beijing Declaration and touch around the women's rights then, during Beijing, and now. She has over 30 years of dedication to human rights and women's rights. So the floor is yours, Wahu Kara. I'm giving you 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for this very timely discussion in the celebration of who we women are and what our history has been and what is continuing to be and what we are looking forward to be located to the purposes that God created us. Speaking to about my remarks towards realization of Beijing Declaration of Women's Rights then and now, I would only want to say that at Beijing, it was a critical moment in our lives in this century that we are living, because Beijing allowed the location of women power and voice not to be anymore ignored. And subsequent to that, the platform itself spoke very heavily on what should be done for women in matters of locating that voice and power for the good of all in every respective society. So to speak, the rights where women were fundamental to any thinking stewardship of nations all over the world, not necessarily in one respective country. And this was going to happen from when the women were young to where they are and even beyond. So it was a statement that women are created beings who have been denied their rightful space and role in society. And actually nations were taking a critique of themselves and a judgment on themselves and agreeing that women have been denied their rightful space. And from then on, the women's rights became critical to any policy designs or thinking or action. And so to speak, human rights, women's rights became buzzwords in conversations, not only at the policy level, but also conversation across and between societies in respective countries as they watched the omission of not locating women in their rightful role in public spaces. Therefore, that voice and that power was a demand that we should be able to do what needed to be done to make sure that women have been allowed to occupy their public spaces effectively and adequately in participation, in particular in decision making. So it was a big critique of the contradictions and the conflict of what holds the center of power, which is very patriarchy and which excludes and does not only exclude women, but excludes, including many men, But many men want to imagine that as long as the center is manifested by the male voice, the male face, therefore they are also in power. But that is not the truth. The truth is the center of power accommodates very few people in decision-making who happen to serve the patriarchal architecture of how our societies are organized at every level, politically, economically, socially. So to speak, Beijing was a radical statement for total pyramid shift, where we must think and envision alternatives of how societies will be organized for inclusiveness. And we cannot talk of equality. We cannot talk of women's rights. We cannot talk of equal rights if we have not addressed the fundamental questions that excludes. And the bottom line is because our societal infrastructure, which has been institutionalized in all levels, be it governance, be it economic activities, be it how we construct social well-being, in itself is very much fundamentally unequal. Therefore, it is the unequal relationship that needed to be addressed. And the question of women's rights became such a glaring pointer and mirror in manifesting this inequity and the urgency of demanding it and fulfilling it. And therefore, beyond Beijing, we've seen the conversation in continuity, and we also have seen efforts here and there to address the fundamental issues. But from where I sit myself, they could never be addressed because the institutionalized system that excludes and that does not care for the majority of others in society had not been addressed. And therefore, women's rights were able to be located at Beijing, articulated, and agreements taken on how it should be answered. But where we are now, those rights are still as abused and as neglected and in oblivion as they were as we were going to Beijing. And this has become the societal architect of an equal relation has not been addressed. Because fundamentally, in life, the question is access of resources, creating wealth together, and distributing wealth among and between ourselves. And that is what has not been addressed globally, continentally, nationally, up to the household level. And the value system of exclusion is so dominated by those who guide and govern societies to a point that they are so blind to realizing when you leave majority of society outside from participation, actually, it is a moment of losing what it is good for all of us, because every human being is important. And therefore, women participation and women taking the center in the public spaces is also very critical. Therefore, as I would want just to submit, Beijing was not an accident. It was the energy of the power and voice of women in the 70s. Remember, in the 70s is when many African nations were becoming independent. So the balance of power globally and even continentally and nationally was very important. Where were you to locate women? So there was that meeting in Mexico in 1975, then we have the meeting in Nairobi 1985, and we have the meeting in Beijing 1995, which, to summarize, just said there should be gender mainstreaming as a guiding principle. But my question always, then and now, gender mainstreaming in which stream? Stream of exclusion, stream of violence, stream of misappropriation of human resources, stream that does not care for the well-being of life, and therefore those fundamental questions then and now are still very, very pertinent. And therefore my summation is this: as we celebrate Beijing plus 30, let us arise to a consciousness that the problem is systemic. It is a system. The institution and the structures that govern and steward life are defective, and we will need to envision anew, to take a mission of restoration for the stewardship of life. And that's where women become critical, and they must take center of power, because by gift of life that God has gifted women, we've been stewards and those who nurture life. So we are the best position to be able to bring our imagination and our visions and our commitments that has kept us doing proactive and productive work in stewardship of life from the very local level to national level and globally, selflessly, to bring the imagination of the principles of equity and oneness and of peace, and overcome this system that just kills life for the greed of a few as they pursue only profit. It is a high time we have a paradigm shift for spiritual restoration of humanity, so that we become sensitive and sensible in going according to the purposes that God created each of us, in becoming proactive actor in oneness and within principles that are for glorifying God for why he created us. And that's why, as we celebrate Beijing plus 30, I am so grateful to God that I have lived to participate, to see, and I am now living to tell. And I am saying the moment of very radical transformation is now. And we will celebrate Beijing plus 30 in locating women in the rightful role in public space to be able to breathe life for the good of all, like we have always done in all our lives, from my grandmothers to my mothers to me now. And I hope my daughters are hearing and my granddaughters are also hearing. And the whole world is hearing of this wake-up call. The system is defective. It kills, it doesn't nurture life. We will need to envision a spiritual system that speaks to the spirit of the being, to be able to know we all matter and we are all integrated and are connected for purposes of living life in fulfillment and in fullness. And that is why we were created. I stand strong to say I'm still strong and able to move this process to the logical conclusion when we shall all be spiritually restored and will be speaking of societies of peace, societies of fullness, where scarcity is not anymore anything to be discussed, and where violence is not the way of life, and where men and women can work together and be the people
Powerful. Thank you very much, Wahu Kara. You've highlighted it as it is. Thank you for bringing out the fact that Beijing was the energy and power of women, and it opened out the voices of the women. Yeah, we heard you very clearly, and you ended it up very, very well. It's time to arise for restoration. And even as you mentioned the patriarchal architecture, I want to enhance it with what the Secretary General Guterres just mentioned on 10th during the start of the CSW meeting in New York. He said women's rights are under siege. The poison of patriarchy is back, and back with a vengeance. So we have to move as women of faith, as women of Africa, as women of the world. Thank you very much for that powerful presentation and powerful keynote address. At this particular moment, I wish to appreciate all participants who are already in our Secretary Generals from different parts of our interreligious councils, the women of faith from all corners of Africa. Feel very welcome and thank you, because we are seeing you introducing yourselves on the chat box. Please just continue introducing yourselves on the chat box. And I want also to assure you that the whole staff of the African Council of Religious Leaders, the technical team, are all inside this particular meeting. They're the ones who organized this webinar. This particular moment, I wish now to bring in the co-chair of the African Women of Faith Network, though I don't think she has already logged in, but we shall be able to allow her, probably if she's able to join us. I know it's very early for her, but as the SG mentioned, her co-chair is here, Nagiba. During the plenary, we'll also give Nagiba that opportunity to also say something from the front of the Africa Women of Faith Network, because this webinar is actually theirs. And it is intergenerational, as we can all see. So allow me now to move to the panel presentations, where we shall be having panel presentations sharing with us around eliminating all forms of violence and fostering women's leadership and participation in economic and peace processes. We are really honored, greatly honored to have, Sunita Kaminha, the Regional Policy Specialist, UN Women SRO. Only last week, she was holding a consultative meeting in Nairobi with civil organizations. And during that meeting, UN Women, led by her, introduced the proposed framework for guiding the entity's work on discriminatory social norms as it relates to gender equality. Sunita, thank you so much for joining us in this particular meeting. And I wish now to invite you to take up the floor for the next 15 minutes at least. Welcome, Sunita.
Thank you so much, Rosila. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Sound is okay?
Yeah.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon to all the esteemed participants and panelists, and our appreciation to the African Council of Religious Leaders and the African Women of Faith Network for hosting this important discussion. UN Women East and Southern Africa Regional Office is really grateful to be here today. First, as we begin, I would like to invite us to pause and reflect. If we think back 30 years, and I know this is intergenerational, so for those who are here on in this world for less than 30 years, you can think back to maybe 20 years or 15 years. Where were you? What did you see in this world as it relates to gender-based violence? I want you to imagine and think about how you came in this space and how it came into be in this space, the space of advocacy, the space of holding rights. Perhaps it was a personal experience, an invitation by someone that you trusted to engage, something you observed or learned that made you get involved. I wanted to begin with these memories and these moments because they're part of the story of progress. And I was really honored to hear Wahu's story and the call to action and her reflection and analysis of what happened in Beijing. I thought I was getting goosebumps. It was really powerful. So asante sana, Wahu, for that. It really was inspiring. But I think these stories and these memories are so critical for us to remember and recognize and amplify, because this is how we are able to show the shifting landscape on the issue of gender-based violence. And amplifying the changes that are actually, women's rights are under siege, and truly they are. So I'll begin with looking at some of the areas where we see progress at regional and national levels. So we do see overall that there has been increased legislative, policy, and institutional reforms. We have clear evidence that the most visible changes contributing to violence-free societies relate to laws, policies, and commitments that have been made at global, regional, national, and in some contexts, subnational levels around service provision to survivors, around women's participation in decision-making, in the establishment of gender-responsive institutions, and accountability measures. In the 30 years since the Beijing Declaration was adopted, nearly all of African member states, 52, have ratified CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 45 have ratified the Maputo Protocol, and many have put in place laws and policies addressing at least one form of violence faced by women and girls. 34 countries, over half, have developed at some point national action plans or strategies addressing gender-based violence or violence against women and girls. And 36 have plans addressing gender equality broadly. Nearly every country in the continent has a dedicated institution with a mandate to advance gender equality. And although the level and resourcing for these institutions vary, they have contributed to growing the attention to gender-responsive planning and budgeting. And we can say today, nearly half of countries in Africa, 23, have systems to track and make public their budget allocations on gender equality, in line with the Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 5C1. We couldn't say this 10 years ago. Many countries have a multi-sectoral coordination mechanism for planning, prevention, and response efforts on gender-based violence. So these are some of the national efforts that we see making progress. At the regional level, the Southern African Development Community developed a GBV strategy and framework for action in 2018, which is currently undergoing a midterm review. The SADC Parliamentary Forum also developed a model law to guide member states on how to legislate on gender-based violence in 2021, and there are guidelines developed underway. The Intergovernmental Authority for the Horn of Africa, or IGAD, the East Africa Community, and the International Conference for the Great Lakes region similarly have gender policies and strategies which include dedicated sections on how these regional bodies will address gender-based violence. At the continental level, the African Union developed a regional action plan on ending violence against women and girls in 2023. And as most of you might know and have been part of, just last month, the African Union heads of state adopted a historic African Union Convention on ending violence against women and girls. And this convention makes Africa the third region with a binding agreement following the Belém do Pará Convention in Latin America and the Caribbean, the Istanbul Convention in Europe, and in particular for this region is an opportunity to elevate common position across African member states to counter the pervasive pandemic of violence against women and girls and other forms of gender-based violence. And just on Monday, the Commission on the Status of Women adopted a political declaration on Beijing Plus 30, reaffirming once again the commitment of member states across the world and in this region to address gender-based violence. These institutional and policy developments are linked to changes in the duty bearers and rights holders' collective accountability around this issue. And as of 2025, we can see that there is greater public consciousness that violence against women and girls is a gross violation of human rights. And in recent years, we can see that women's rights advocates, those that were at Beijing, organizations that have been working in this area for decades, have been joined by political leaders, by social influencers, private sector actors, the media, in making a common declaration that there's no excuse for violence against women and girls and gender-based violence. In Africa, the AU Presidential Champions on Positive Masculinity is an example of this public consciousness. We also see that the more attention to this issue is linked to the increase in data and evidence on addressing gender-based violence, including in these intersections between humanitarian conflict and climate-related disasters. There is increased visibility of the issue and data on women's experiences with violence. For example, more than half of countries in Africa have prevalence data on intimate partner violence. And increasing data is available on sexual harassment in public spaces, technology-facilitated gender-based violence, as well as femicide, the intentional killing of women and girls. However, the data trends do highlight a worrying picture, that despite these significant legislative, policy, and institutional measures, we continue to see a pervasive level of violence that is shifting in its manifestation across settings and contexts, in physical and increasingly in online settings. As we reflect on the 3 decades since the Beijing Declaration was made, we can highlight a few bottlenecks that are showing up repeatedly. First, the low political will to act at the scale required to address the issue. We know gender-based violence remains significantly under-resourced across countries. Analysis of the institutions responsible for implementing commitments, the efforts to hold perpetrators of violence accountable for their actions, and existing programs to eliminate the issue suggests there is a real disconnect between the beautiful words on paper and the actions that take place in practice. This accountability gap is particularly challenging when we consider known perpetrators of gender-based violence in positions of authority and power. Second, there is insufficient attention to preventing violence before it begins and working in a concerted whole-of-society approach. Too often, prevention is interpreted as awareness raising, rather than the multiple strategies that have been proven to be effective under addressing the underlying causes of gender-based violence. With the growth in the number of actors engaging in the ecosystem of addressing GBV, we must be deliberate to disrupt the tendency to work in fragmented ways. And we really need to internalize that no single organization or sector can make meaningful contribution to the issue working alone. Third, the limited focus on investing in addressing the underlying power structures which facilitate gender-based violence and other forms of men's violence in society to oppress specific groups of people at the benefit of a few. This means we really need to reposition our understanding of violence against women and girls and other forms of gender-based violence as an issue for women and girls alone that sits at the margins of the state priorities and budgets. And we have to shift the general perception violence against women and girls as an individual criminal act rather than a systemic form of oppression. There is ample evidence that the gender-based power imbalances which drive violence against women and girls are a widespread concern affecting all people and are directly contributing to instability and deepening inequalities and are a fundamental barrier to peace and prosperity for every country in the region. But this evidence does not appear when we look at our policies and our programs, our collective advocacy, and the state investments, which need to more explicitly situate efforts to address gender-based violence in the context of militarization, debt, and climate crisis. So where do we go from here? We know what is needed to take action. We need comprehensive approaches. We need to engage everyone and we need to sustain these efforts over time, in line with our frameworks and commitments that are already made. We know that coordinated prevention efforts need to look at the root causes, as well as the risk and protective factors for different forms of violence. This can draw upon existing evidence-based strategies. For example, socioeconomic empowerment of women and adolescent girls, gender transformative education and parenting, safe public space and workplace initiatives, initiatives working with couples on relationship strengthening, mobilizing communities, and ensuring that quality services are available for survivors. And these strategies build on the lessons already established by women's rights organizations who have historically led the advocacy and the interventions to prevent and respond to violence against women and girls. Prevention efforts can also shift discriminatory narratives, which condone violence and perpetuate gender inequality. This means creating alternative realities that support leaders and influencers from faith institutions, from the state, from the market, or cultural institutions to develop narratives which challenge discriminatory norms and amplify existing egalitarian norms from communities themselves. Beyond prevention, we know that we have to ensure that services, quality multi-sectoral services, remain available to survivors in their diversity. We know that more countries have institutional standards and training available for the health sector, police, justice, and social sectors of what this actually means for different survivors, including through new initiatives around remote or mobile services, one-stop centers, helplines tailored to the needs of specific groups of women and girls. We need now to move these examples to the norm and to having these as rather than examples, but actually as the established practice. And this is possible with concerted action. For all women and girls, we must also improve access to health, education, and social protection services, as well as assets, because this can redistribute and shift the unequal power imbalances within communities that perpetuates violence to exist. And finally, in terms of a comprehensive approach, we need to ensure that there's flexible, long-term, and core financial investments and resourcing for diverse women's rights, women-led organizations, and movements to operate over time in different contexts, including by ensuring the rights and the space for women human rights defenders and advocates to do their work. That autonomous women's movements and feminist movements have been proven over time across regions to be key in contributing to policy and legislative changes to ending gender-based violence, ensuring that survivors have access to services even in the context of crises, and increasingly, and helping governments to meet their commitments on the issue as partners. We also know that support to movements enables young groups who are marginalized by existing power structures, whether it's young women, women with disabilities, women in displacement settings, cross-border traders, and informal work. Movements allow these groups to mobilize and support each other. That peer support can be very strategic to enhance rights and collective power, which again, as we heard, is increasingly under attack. And we know that this mobilization is effective. Studies in South Africa, for example, have showed that over time, how comprehensive laws and policies, coupled with efforts by women's rights organizations preventing gender-based violence, firearms control legislation, and activism, contributed to substantive and sustained decreases in femicide over a 20-year period. So this work is effective. So finally, allow me to end with 4 key points. First, let us keep centering women and girls most affected by violence, those with lived experience and expertise as we come to the table and our tables, whether our tables in the interfaith councils, in the houses of faith, during intergovernmental moments and spaces such as the Commission on the Status of Women, the African Forum on Sustainable Development taking place next month in Uganda, or the climate conferences, the Financing for Development conferences happening later this year. Second, let us remain vigilant of how power structures are being sustained or shifted by our efforts. If we see gender equality as a liberation struggle and the pushback that's surfacing in the current moment as a reflection of the resistance to shifting power structures, then we should feel hopeful that progress is underway and keep the momentum. third, let us continue to connect the dots, as no one can do this alone. So we must continue to deliberately invest in collaboration and challenge ourselves to move away from competition and that scarcity mindset mentioned earlier. We know that gender-based violence affects us all, whether directly or indirectly. And so the change must start by healing within. And finally, let us celebrate progress and build systems for self and collective care for us to really move forward in a sustainable way. Through concerted and collective action in this African Union Year of Reparations and Justice, let's keep moving for the potential of a gender equitable and violence-free society for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sunita. And thank you. I like the way you've ended it. A reminder that we are actually celebrating the gains women have made since Beijing. And indeed, we appreciate what UN Women is doing. We know you are the entity, or UN is the entity for gender equality and women empowerment. Thank you for taking us down memory lane, because it starts with our own memories and experiences. We have, in one way or the other, directly or indirectly, experienced all this. We are talking about gender equality and women empowerment. And thank you for highlighting the frameworks that are in place, and even those that have been ratified as an indication of the progress. So what remains for us are the 4 points that you have ended your presentation with. Thank you very much, Sunita. Now I just want to request us to maybe just for 2 minutes to watch a brief video, because it's a celebration of what women have been able to achieve. So we were able to have a collection of some of the women of faith, and the video will play shortly so that you just see, appreciate what they've been able to gain up to this particular moment in terms of progress since Beijing +30. So please go ahead. Go ahead, Yaya. Yaya, are you there?
Yes, Dr. Rosita, just a
All
minute.
right, all right.
Yes.
Is a feature just with some write-ups on what some of our women of faith have been able to realize in the different corners of Africa, right from Guinea to DRC to Kenya to Nigeria and other countries.
Dr. Rosila, may I request to do it after the next speaker, please?
No problem, Yaya. Noted. So now I wish now to bring in Ms. Mildred Ngesa. She had been introduced. She's a transformational leadership coach and a media specialist. She has worked for many key media houses in Kenya. So the floor is now yours, Ms. Mildred Ngesa. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosila, and I hope I'm audible enough because my internet connection is a bit faulty. I hope you can hear. Thank you, Dr. Rosila. I appreciate the space. Let me start by acknowledging everybody in the space, but especially the women on whose shoulders I stand. May I acknowledge and kiss your feet, Mama Wahukara. It is always a learning moment with you, and you have carried us literally on your shoulders as you lead us through. Thank you for bringing it up to our consciousness from last year that African women will no longer die for Africa, they will live for Africa. May I acknowledge my sister, Mother Stella Sabiti from Uganda, who I am so honored to reconnect with on this platform. Mama Stella Sabiti, it is through you that I got the seeds of working in women, peace and security and understanding what it means to bring out the consciousness of women in peace and security. I thank you, my mothers, because we are doing the work and we are trying to pass the baton just the way you passed the baton to us and gave us all the information and the guidance we needed. I thank you and I honor you. I have been given a topic that is a bit difficult to actually tackle in 20 minutes, but this is what I want to do. If we are talking about bridging the gender leadership and empowerment and women's empowerment participation gap, allow me to quickly introduce the organization that I represent in this space. It is a state. Africa has 5 regions. No, Africa has 6 regions. So it is the 6th state in the African Union, the SOWAD, the state of the African diaspora. And we in the SOWAD stand on the ultimate belief that Pan-African women in the diaspora are equally critical on our work on emancipation and empowerment, and indeed must be prioritized. The SOWAD, I work together in the Ministry of Women, Social and Economic Development. And may I just quickly let you know that in this ministry, our focus is number 1, healing, because we reckon that we can push African women the farthest we want, but African women have trauma and pain manufactured in their being, because by virtue of just being African women, there's a lot of pain. And so if we don't focus on healing, we will be flogging down African women to achieve things they cannot achieve. So healing is one of our very strong pillars. We look into social cohesion, we look into leadership, we look into safety and justice and protection, we look into economic power, and we look into research, information management, systems, and accountability. And so I bring the greetings of my minister, Honorable Ntambi Monsho from South Africa, and to say that the spaces like this are really critical for us to be very inclusive and to intentionally look at our collective power. And so to take over the topic of whether, and I will switch off my camera, hoping that it will help with my connectivity. I wanted to share my screen, but that's okay. I can read through it. I see I don't have access, but I can read through my screen if that's okay, Dr. Rosila.
That's fine, Mildred. It's okay.
Okay, I was given the topic, bridging the gender and leadership and economic participation gap. But let me ask you, participants here in the space, you have worked for years in the women's empowerment space for years. 30 years ago, I want to say very confidently, I was 20, maybe not mature enough to understand what was actually at stake. But 30 years ago, women went to Beijing, and the 12 areas that they focused on are the areas that you and I still talk about. For example, just quickly think about your country. Think about number 1, the women and poverty situation in your country. Number 2, the education and training of women in your country. Number 3, women and health. Number 4, violence against women. Number 5, women and armed conflict. Number 6, women and the economy. Number 7, women in power and decision making. Number 8, women and the environment. Number 9, women and the human rights of women. Number 10, women and the media. Number 11, women and institutional support. And number 12, women and media. And when you think about that, please try and reflect in your mind as to where your country is at when it comes to the areas that were being pushed 30 years ago. Now, in this space of the African Council of Religious Leaders, all religions represented acknowledge that 30 years is an earmark here, that is a significant year. The Christians know that 30 years is the year of maturity, the year of readiness, the year to respond to divine calling. It's the year where Jesus found his calling, Joseph. Then this is a very key year. The Quran with our Muslim brothers and sisters also acknowledge that 30 years is a key year of maturity and responsibility. And this is the same with our Hindu brothers and sisters. The Vedas talk about 30 years as a year of transformation, change. But now I reflect and think through my topic, and I wonder about what it is we want to understand about bridging the gap of leadership and economic participation in Africa for African women. So I know that many of us do not even understand the gender gap in Africa. We talk about it, we have not internalized it. The historical context of our gender roles dates back to our cultural norms. How many of us identify and address cultural norms from the roots that might be a contribution to our gender gaps? How many of us infuse impact of colonialism into our conversations when it comes to gender gaps? How many of us talk about societal expectations of women that have limited women's opportunities in leadership and economic participation? The current state of gender disparity in Africa is huge. All our 55 African countries, including Western Sahara, we all have underrepresentation in leadership, more so in political leadership. We have underrepresentation in economic challenges because women encounter substantial economic challenges that hinder their ability to participate fully. We have a disparity in our impact on society, and yet women are more in terms of our population dispensation. So our regional variations within the continent, diversity across regions, we know that Africa's diversity leads to significant variations in the gender gap, reflecting cultural, economic, and political differences. Yet, we also know that when it comes to the discrimination of women, just as it was 30 years ago, it almost has the same face from Cape to Cairo in all African countries, in all African situations. So progresses and challenges in African countries are quite, they are encouraging to note, but also disheartening when we make 2 steps forward and 4 steps back. Some countries are making notable progress in gender equality, others are facing ongoing challenges and entrenched disparities. The importance of understanding these variations will really make us understand how we can bridge the gap. So the barriers to female leadership and economic participation, I want to ask the participants, what are the cultural and social norms that you encounter in your country that actually contributes to be a barrier to your economic leadership participation of the women? Gender roles in communities, what are those gender roles? Barriers to leadership, there are quite many. Women have to actually encounter hurdles to get into leadership. And many countries are not keen yet on the need for this change. The other barrier is educational and skill gaps. There was talk about skill gaps. What are we doing as those working in the space to bridge the gap of education and skills gap? The barriers to education actually talk about disparities, prevent many women from accessing quality education, which is essential for personal and professional growth. Skills training opportunities. The Ministry of Women and Social Development in the state of the African diaspora is taking this very seriously and taking into consideration the fact that we cannot be women in the cities running too fast and leaving alone the women in the rural areas without helping to bridge the gap, that they too can stand up and say we have attained this kind of educational skill. So the economic participation of women can never be fully acknowledged and recognized and celebrated unless it is collectively put together. So legal and policy challenges is also another issue. We have many inadequate legal frameworks, but then again, we also have many policy frameworks like what Ms. Sunita has just said. We celebrated 2 weeks ago when the African Union adopted the Convention to End Violence Against Women. But the devil is in the detail of the implementation of that convention. So now we in the space are saying, so how are we organizing to ensure that we are holding our countries accountable to domesticate, to ratify, to implement, to report on this convention? So it is very good. We have been fighting for this, and it is good because it has come in through the African Union. So now let us roll up our sleeves and look at how that is going to be implemented for the good of African women in the continent. The impact on gender equality, barriers in legal and policy frameworks can significantly hinder progress towards gender equality and women's empowerment. Therefore, I want to emphasize the importance of policy change that gatherings such as this, but the African Council of Religious Leaders. What kind of policy change agenda are we driving? How much are we sustaining the policy change agenda? And how passionate and committed are we to these policy challenges and to the policy change agenda across the continent? We know also that strategies for promoting gender equality in leadership, we are defining and redefining every day. Empowerment through education, importance of girls' education, access to training programs, leadership development, mentorship programs. All this is important for us to take into consideration if we need to bridge the gap of leadership and economic participation of women. Mentorship and networking programs. I will say with a fact and with a certainty that I am a beneficiary of mentorship, collective mentorship and intentional mentorship. When I sit by the feet of Mama Wahu Kara, I sit there to listen, to learn, and to be guided. And this kind of mentorship opens up my mind and thinking into how I will move forward and in essence, use my hand to pull back the younger ones coming up towards leadership or getting into this position. So how do we bridge this gap? We must factor in the importance of mentorship. We must create spaces within where we work for networking opportunities. We must build the confidence of the young ones as they are mentored by the elders. We say in our spaces that the youth walk fast, but the elders know the way. Where are the elders to help the youth, to tell them, you are running very fast, but pass this way. This is the right route. This is, many times I hear the youth are not listening. I want to speak as a recovering youth. And I want to say that we do listen. And I want to emphasize again to Mama Wahu and Mama Stella Sabiti, we do listen. It might be years back, but we do listen and we follow. So please, are we able to infuse intentional mentorship into our thinking? So once again, policy reforms and advocacy. We need to redefine and rethink how we will promote gender equality. We need to really reinfuse consciousness of supporting women's rights. We know that many of our countries, we are seeing drawbacks, we are seeing pushbacks. In this era of the global gag rule, a lot of the work we have done, we are seeing pushback in it. How then do we quickly come together collectively to be ensure that we trench inclusive policy reforms in our advocacy? So the economic empowerment initiatives, access to finance and resources. For example, my ministry at the State of the African Diaspora, my Ministry for Women and Social Development, acknowledges that women do not even have homes where they can live and feel the integrity and the dignity that they ought to have. Women do not even have the consciousness or the realization that it is their right to have economic actualization. And so how do we do that meaningfully for women to see that there is a difference in their situation? So economic empowerment is very important. How do we enhance access to finance? How do we create support initiatives that help women to get onto their financial and economic feet? How do we ensure that there is inclusivity in business acumen and growth across our countries? We have to be so conscious that in any economic space where women are missing must be so disturbing to us that we don't really. So support for women entrepreneurs is key. The conversation I bring in bridging this gap is, how many of us are being intentional with supporting women entrepreneurs? How do we infuse them in our advocacy work? How do we infuse the training for entrepreneurs? How do we infuse it in our mentorship programs? How do we infuse it in pushing women to access markets, women entrepreneurs to access markets? So inclusive economic policies are so important for us if we are to bridge the gender and leadership gap. We know that empowering women economically means that we have to infuse work-life balance policies. We know that it is never the same, the ground is never the same for women when it comes to economic and business-related policies. So how do we infuse work-life balance policies? How do we support career advancement for women who actually bear the brunt of so much? So I want to just say again that it is important for us as we work, especially for us in the spaces where we have conversations about religion and the impact of religion, notable female leaders in Africa. We know that our continent is rich with spiritual nourishment and leadership. I love it so much when Mama Wahu says that this is the era of spiritual restoration. How many of us go back to reflect on the women whose spiritual leadership and spiritual power galvanized the pre-colonial African countries towards their self-actualization? How many of us look into what that means in terms of impacting a young woman growing up 50 years back then, and who didn't know and understand that we had spiritual leaders from across the continent who helped and inspired women in different ways? So we have to be very conscious of bringing out who I love to call pre-colonial femininjas, who might not even have been celebrated in the history, in the colonial history you and I might have gone through in the schools we went through. So then who are the pre-colonial femininjas in your space who opened up spaces for women and girls so that women can be in their full potential? And we 50 years or 60 years later are celebrating standing on our feet. So I want to bring to the attention of the space that successful gender equality programs are things that we need to sustain and actually infuse in a very intentional way. We have to promote women in leadership. We have to ensure economic participation strategies are put in place. And we have to promote best practices for inclusion. So the impact on communities and economies will be the empowerment of women, will be economic growth. The social outcomes will change, and no part of the society will be left behind. So these are the recommendations that we are looking at. Please, let's get into promoting awareness. How do we raise more awareness, meaningful awareness for bridging this gender, leadership, and economic participation gap? How do we think outside the box to raise this awareness? Sometimes we are told, oh, these women in the space are making too much noise, or the feminists are always radical and making noise. So we are being shut down to keep quiet, yet we are addressing gaps that are real, where women are left out, just the way our mothers who went to Beijing 30 years ago did, in defiance and with all their power they did, and they raised the curtains for the world to know. How do we advocate for women's rights? How do we engage stakeholders to ensure that we are able to do that? Now, most importantly, dear participants, how do we strengthen collaborations and partnerships? We might not all be in the field of women of faith. We might not all be part of the African Council of religious leaders. But how do we strengthen collaboration? How do you reach out and tell me, Mildred, are you able to work with us to ensure that this pursuit is realized? Are we able to look at the interreligious representation towards some radical shift in the countries that have problems in this continent? For example, if we're talking peace and security, we are seeing a metamorphosis of violence that is unprecedented in countries of conflict. In Sudan, beloved, and this might be a trigger, we are seeing the sadness of women who prefer to commit suicide as opposed to being caught up in the conflict and be subjected to unspeakable sexual violence. The world is not talking about it. Sudan remains forgotten. In the DRC, the war in the DRC currently going has been hushed in a way that the face of women and girls is not clearly seen in how they bear the brunt. It is in the DRC that we are told of even prisons that have had prison breakaways and inmates have broken into women-female prisons and subjected them to unspeakable sexual violation. And across the communities, across the schools, in DRC, it has been made to be quiet in a way that the voices and faces of women are not coming out as they should. So how do we strengthen collaborations and partnerships so that we are able to lift women out in whatever situation they have? What kind of innovative approaches can we employ for lasting change? Beloved participants, we are in the era of AI. We are in the era of leveraging on technology. We are in the era of social media impact, of creative solutions. We are with generations that are very fast on their fingers. How are we leveraging in innovating these approaches for lasting change for women? So in conclusion and in my thoughts, we do need a multifaceted approach to bridge the gender leadership gap. It's totally multifaceted. We can't look at one era and forget the other. We can't look at one sequence and leave out the other. It has to be multifaceted. Now, what does that mean? How do we draw the map to connect the dots so that it is meaningful? Number two, how do we address the barriers that still stop women from attaining our desired gender, leadership, and economic participation equilibrium? How do we address those barriers? We know that we have always talked about gaps where they are. And we're always saying now, women, it's 30 years after Beijing, we are not lamenting. We are moving from the book of lamentations. We are now jumping into the book of actions. So what are the actions? We have lamented for 30 years. We know. So now how do we act? Number three, how do we foster collaborations? I emphasize. How do we reach out from Cape to Cairo to say we are together in this one? Even the woman at the Sahrawi is a woman who needs to be listened to and to be heard and to be brought into the space. How then again do we create equitable futures for women so that we are able to say we are looking at 30 years that is very meaningful and 30 years which we have fought for or our mothers fought for to make it productive for our daughters and for our future. And so I thank you again, and I urge that in the conversations we are having today with appreciation to the African Council of Religious Leaders, that we reflect into thinking about our own countries, about our own situations. For example, we ask in this Kenya, where I am talking from, which community in Kenya are girls still not being taken to school? And that should bother me, that even though I'm in the city in Nairobi and I went to school, there are still communities where girls are not going to school. So I want to thank you again. I want to really hope that our conversations will again nurture and give birth to revolutions that will carry our future forward to bridge the gender and leadership and economic participation gap for women and girls. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mildred. Thank you very much. And I loved what you said, recovering youth. Yeah, many of us here are also recovering youth. But indeed, that was powerful, Mildred. Thank you for finishing it off or ending it by emphasizing the fact that we need a multifaceted approach to bridge the gender gap. Thank you for emphasizing the fact that barriers are still there that are inhibiting women from realizing the economic equilibrium. You highlighted the 12 critical areas of action that were developed during Beijing in 1995. And I hear you urging all of us here in our respective countries to also take a step and try to interrogate the national progress reports on implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform, because quite a national countries at national level normally come up with these reports after every 5 years. I think the latest that is we have come across is for 2024. And it really highlights where countries are in terms of these critical areas. And of course, you've challenged all the women here, the women of faith, to come up with more innovative approaches that will make us move women to another level And of course, you have appreciated that progress has been made. Thank you very much, Mildred, for that powerful presentation. I'm told Sister Agatha Chikeleo is already here, the co-chair for the African Women of Faith Network. Feel very welcome. I now want to invite, feel very welcome, sister. Nice to have you here. Yeah. So I now want to invite Stella Sabiti. Stella is the advisor to the AU National Network of Women in Conflict Prevention and Mediation. She's a distinguished peace builder and mediator from Uganda. And one thing that also stands out in her work is that she was able to facilitate peace negotiations between the Uganda National Rescue Front 2 rebel group and the Ugandan government back in 2002. And she has continued steadily to contribute a lot towards peace building efforts. Feel very welcome, Stella Stabiti. The floor is now yours. I'm giving you 15 minutes. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me a little time because I don't have much to say. Everything has already been said. We are like reading from the same page. So thank you very, very much for inviting me. Am I happy to see you, Mildred? It's been centuries. I've been trying to look for you and I couldn't find you. And look, the people of faith have brought us together again. And I'm seeing someone Koulibaly, I don't know, maybe from Mali, maybe it's the general, I'm not so sure, but I know she's one of us. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy, I'm so proud. And I don't know, am I a recovering youth or a what youth? I'm somewhere ahead there because I'm 71 years old. And I've had 45 plus years of working on the issue of peace and security. Yeah, the years pass, but that is just accountability that we've been persistent and consistent in what we're doing. And when I see that we have young people with us, I celebrate. Although many young people, I've heard them say that we are tired of these matriarchs. We are waiting for them to die. So really, if we want to succeed in this struggle of putting women front and center in the field of peace building, I'll just call it peace building because there are so many little branches in there, important, but so many. We have to really, really create a good working relationship across the divide, across the ages. We really need to do that. Intergenerational focus is very, very vital. Otherwise, we will be shooting ourselves in the foot, and then the men will be laughing at us. It happens very many times. So thank you so much. And Sunita asked, she asked us at the beginning to think back what brought us into this field. Well, when I was in my 20s, that's 1976, I was abducted from the university in Uganda during the time of Idi Amin, and I was thoroughly tortured as a ringleader of an uprising at Makerere University. I can tell you I wasn't part of any of that. I was newly married, madly in love with my husband, and I think he's hearing me next door. I was expecting our first baby. I survived, she survived, because I was in the moment. When I'm talking with a group like this one that is faith-based, I say that God was walking with me all the time through that torturing thing. Because I had a voice, there was a voice with me. It was with me. I wasn't alone, and it was guiding me on what to do every step of the way. Until at the end, when I thought I was dying, that voice said, don't die without finding out why these soldiers are doing this to you and accusing you of things they know very well you didn't do. They knew. And then I was saying, but how? I want to die. And I was arguing with God. I said, no. I've passed the tests you've given me. I'm ready to die. I'm ready to come and join you. I don't want any more assignments. I don't want to talk to these soldiers. But the voice persisted, no, you have to. So I eventually looked up, and what I saw shocked me because the soldiers were crying. They were crying at the harm they were doing to me and to the other students with us. And it was boys and girls, girls and boys. It wasn't just us alone, but we were the majority. And I saw them crying, and I said,
Version
no,
française,
God,
s'il
no.
vous plaît.
Sorry?
Version française, s'il vous plaît.
The French, sorry, Stella. I think she's highlighting the French. Is the French interpretation working?
Yes, it's working. Let me guide on the chat box on what she needs to do. It's
Okay,
working.
okay. Go ahead, Stella.
Ah, je parle français, mais je ne peux pas m'expliquer très bien. Yeah, c'est ça. Merci. Okay, so I continue. So yes, so that's how I was introduced into this field of peace building, because I discovered that the soldiers who were doing horrible harm to me were actually crying at what they were doing to me and to my fellow. I'm muted.
Okay, yeah, okay, it's fine.
Are we okay?
Yes, we are okay, Stella.
Okay. Okay, so we go, and I have maybe 10 minutes or 5. I don't know. I don't want to repeat what has been said already, but telling my story of torture is actually part of my presentation, and I'm glad that Sunita asked that question. It's my segue. It's because when I saw that the soldiers were crying at what they were doing to me and others, I promised myself, if I survive, I will work with armed groups. And that's what I've been doing. And that group, when Rosilla introduced me and said I brought rebels from the bush and helped them to negotiate with the government, those are the guys who had nearly killed me 26 years earlier. Those are the same, but they had turned into rebels because governments had changed over almost 3 decades. So you can imagine you are a mediator, and one of the people you're trying to bring together had nearly killed you 26 years ago. So if that is not an example, one of divine intervention, that if we tune into God or whatever power we feel in ourselves, if we don't tune into that, we will be misguided. And let us believe in that. And I also know that women, we can do it. We've been doing it. My sisters have already said, or my daughters. But I was working with the women of Liberia. You all know them. If you haven't seen the video, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, please look for it. And the women of, I was helping in the disarmament. I was helping the UN to do disarmament. And the men of Liberia said, yeah, we've been letting the country down. We've done all the harm. So what we will do, we will leave all the peace to be done by the women. And I was thinking, yeah, I wish men in Uganda could hear that. The men of Liberia are saying the women can do it. And then the women stood up and they said, no way, no way. We are tired. You, the men, you can't continue causing harm and then expecting us to be the ones to come and clean up your mess. From now on, we work together. We work together hand in hand. For me, that was so fantastic, especially that I'm an ardent supporter of positive masculinity. So one thing I haven't said, I was UN Women advisor to the African Union in peace and security when I built that network of African women in conflict prevention and mediation. That's FemWise Africa. And I chose the name FemWise myself with my children. So we gave the network. It was in my terms of reference to give the network a name. So I created it and I gave it that name, which is a fantastic name. We fought over it a little bit with the AU, but we did. And I think UN Women doesn't praise itself enough in helping the African Union to create that network Network of African Women in Peace Building, in conflict prevention and mediation. And so we are guided by all these frameworks, which really are like a culmination of all the struggles we've gone through. And I said I'm 71, and we're the recovering youth, like in the other class or something. I have my 98-year-old mother. When I was little, I saw my mother also struggling for the same things. She used to go for international conferences. She's now 98, and she can articulate anything, any day right now. So we have strong women, but we also, and my topic also mentions the word resilience. Yeah, we are resilient, but we are also tired of being expected to do everything while others don't do anything. We all are needed. And remember that war does not just harm only women and children and other people. The largest target is actually young men, because they're the ones who are armed and trying to protect their towns or their communities or their families. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm not judging, but I'm saying they are really the ones at the front line. So my friend Mildred talked about trauma. Everyone is traumatized. All of us are traumatized. Let us try to learn how to help ourselves. Really, charity begins at home. For us, when there was the genocide in Rwanda, we were among the first ones to go to Kigali, and the bodies were still on the ground. We saw horrible things before they had made that memorial place. It was horrible, horrible. When we came home, we didn't know why things were different. We didn't realize it was because we were traumatized. So we had to be trained on how to help ourselves heal. And then we incorporated it within our training. And Mildred, you remember in Nairobi when we went somewhere in the forest, and yeah, without any agenda, without anything, that was fantastic to help us heal. I always refer to that. No, nothing, no pens, no nothing. And we're all from different spaces in Africa who are doing very difficult, traumatizing work. So we need to do that. We need to commune with nature. I'm also supposed to talk about the environment. What don't we know about the environment? Well, we are trying to borrow here, there, and all that, when we know very well that our culture is very environment friendly. We are trying to rein in the pastoralists, tell them, no, stay, be sedentary, but they know that their cows, their goats, and so on will ruin the land because they knew they had to move, let the land recover, and then come back later. All those indigenous mechanisms of peace building, of taking care of our nature. In Africa, everything is connected. We have the Ubuntu. I don't exist unless you exist. I actually exist through you. So it means that your care, your well-being is in my hands if I also want to have that well-being and care. So it's together. And when I look at the word Ubuntu, I've just written a paper, I sent it off last night. It's not just human beings, because in my language, a person is Omuntu or Umuntu, but a thing is Echintu, Akantu, Uguntu. It's also NTU, the root word is there. It means we are all together, human beings, animals, inanimate things, stones, rocks. Remember, when we do reconciliation in Africa, traditionally, indigenously, they go where there is a spring, so waterfall, huge mountain, a volcano. It has to be a place which is not always accessed by people. We are communing with nature. We are not saying hello to the devils. It's not that. We are communing with nature. It's our indigenous intelligence, indigenous science. It's our science. Now I'm a mediator for the World Bank. It's a bit challenging, but I do that, and I continue to support the African Union and the UN in general, because I joined the UN when I was in my 20s in Nairobi. I was introduced to this work through the All Africa Conference of Churches in the early 80s, when the 80s were just coming in. Because I'm a journalist, and that's where Mildred and I also have common ground, Media for Peace. I was at the African Church Information Service within the All Africa Conference of Churches. And I'm proud that my youngest daughter also was at the AACC liaison office to the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I spent 20 years building the African peace and security architecture. I don't think I was taken on as a woman. I was taken on as someone of substance. So ladies, let us not lie back and say that being a woman is enough. It's great because experience, we're hammered, we go through everything. We die in the process, or we're just dispirited, but we get up and we do it. Yes, that is there. On top of that, we need to have skills. Already the skills have been talked about. We need them. We need them because the challenges out there are not a joke. I've also worked for many years in Europe when the Ferdinand Marcos regime collapsed in Asia. It's like a story right now because Duterte has been taken to The Hague. So when I was working based in the Netherlands in the 1980s, there was that chaos in the Philippines when the father of the current president of the Philippines was in power. There was the Tiananmen Square in China. There was the fall of the Berlin Wall, beginning of the 90s. We were involved in the Cold War. We were involved for peace. We demonstrated against nuclear escalation. I've been in Asia working on that. I've been on small islands you will never even pinpoint on the map. Why am I saying this? That we can do it. We can do it, and we have to build our own capacity. Let us rely on whatever we can. Let us build, I said, let us link horizontally. Let's burst all those barriers. Let's link across, and let's link also vertically, depending on where you are. If you're here and there's a level above those levels, burst the ceilings and go there. Burst the ceiling down and join our brothers and sisters down there. We shouldn't be on our own. We should be embracing positive masculinities. I love it. I love it so much. But I know that when you want to get funding to do that, then the women groups say, but no, you're taking money for women and girls. You're going to use it to work on men. Without collaborating with the men, we won't get there. The men will tell you, okay, fine, you do your own thing as women, but remember, when you go around the corner, you'll find us waiting there and we will block you. It's not that they're standing there physically, but you know what it means, because they're the ones who are holding power. So we have to be smart. We have to be very, very smart and very, very strategic. Finally, I was training a group of bishops from around Africa who were in Nairobi. That was 1996. If you can see, that was a few years after the genocide in Rwanda. And we were there. I was training them in this peace and reconciliation and so on. These were big bishops, older than me and very important ones. I wasn't sure why I was the one invited to train them. But something wonderful happened because we were watching the TV at some point. There was this big story that all the Rwandese who had run away from Rwanda to seek refuge across the border to Congo they were tired of being there, suffering. They together got all their few belongings and they decided to cross the border and come back home to Rwanda, to nothing. That's how they put it. They said, we'd rather die in our country than die across. Now, these bishops looked at that story and we halted the training. And they said, look what is happening. And as we were watching, the cabinet of Rwanda, the government, was sitting and they saw the exodus, but exodus is going away. And they were coming back. I don't know the opposite. They were coming back from exile in Eastern Congo, the refugees. And the cabinet just put a stop to the meetings. They said, let's go to the border. Let's welcome our people coming back. And this bishop said, and we are here. What are we doing? We are the men of God. They were all men. We are men of God. What are we doing? Look what the government of Rwanda has done. What have we done? It was a time for self-reflection. Finally, if I talk about positive masculinity, I can't stop talking. I can't stop without talking about some key UN Security Council resolutions, that address that issue of masculinity. There's UNSCR 2106, there's 2242, there is 2467. That shows that the UN, which is us, is beginning to think, is beginning to be willing to think and consider men. Because in those resolutions, read them, men are not there. It's women are raped, women are not in leadership, they're blocked from leadership. They never say who is blocking the women, who is raping the women. Of course, they can't say that. They can't. It's the UN, it's the African Union, it's the East African Community, it's IGAD. You know, those intergovernmental bodies can't talk like that. But now they are also recognizing the fact that we need men and boys in order to succeed as women wanting to be active in peace building, because they can help us, you know, break down those doors. They are our partners. They are not our enemies. Men and boys have never been our enemies. And we don't want them to be, and we don't want to be called enemies, never. It also acknowledges the fact that they also encounter sexual-based violence. Men are raped. Men are raped. And when we say that rape is used as a weapon of war, it's not just on the women and children and girls, it's the men as well. It's the men, to emasculate them. They do that. And I'm in a group of those survivors, and there is a man, I don't want to mention his name, but he's open. He's an African American. He's a movie star in the US, huge black guy. He's in that group with us. And he says he was raped by men. Then he went, and he's famous, but he was raped by men. He went to the nearest police station to report, and the fellow guys, the police officers, looked at him and they just laughed at him. No, you are famous and you're big, you know, you could have crushed them. How could you have been raped by men? They just laughed at him. And he crawled out of the police station without any redress, without any care or anything, any consideration. So we need to be aware of this. We all have brothers, we all have fathers or uncles or nieces, nephews and so on. Let us bridge that gap. And I'm thinking that maybe that's why our gains are not as substantive as they should be. And Mama Wahu Kara talked about which system are we mainstreaming into? Fantastic question. I have a drawing which I use because I use animation in my training. I just want to animate people. I don't give them anything they don't know, because everybody knows what should be known. They know. Everyone knows. I just animate them to help them get that out and use it to march ahead and forward. And I say you can't get a square pin, a square something, and fit it into a round hole. It will not go in. So you not only give the power to the women and girls and whoever is downtrodden, you not only give them power to stand up and get into the arena, but you also have to change that arena. Otherwise, it will not succeed. And I think that's one of the reasons we are doing that. The systems, we are not changing the systems. I've been at the AU more than 20 years, at the African Union in peace and security. Now it is PAPS. And I tell you, I was becoming a man. I was becoming militarized because I was the team leader for building the African Peace and Security Architecture, APSA, which is for everything to do with peace and security on the African continent and the diaspora. Really, and I always said to my sisters outside, I said, keep checking on me because I see I'm changing. It's because the system, I was fitted into a system that hadn't moved or changed, and it takes long to do that. Finally, work at the, sorry, I've said finally many times, work at the community level. That's where the soul is, because that's where the conflict happens, because that's where people live. Community towns, so on the ground. It doesn't happen at the UN, at the AU, at the regional economic communities. and regional mechanisms. No, 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 no. It happens where people live, on earth here, on the ground, where you can walk and step. So we have to make sure that we work at that level and we bridge the gap between the communities and all these different levels. We need to do that. And my dear friends, if there is rampant gender-based violence, if there is rampant domestic violence, and so on and so forth, child marriage, child pregnancies, and all that, school dropout, if war wants to come to your country, it will eat you up very fast because you're weak. You don't have a strong structure on the ground. So we need to strengthen our structure on the ground in order to prevent that. I think I thank you so much. Talked about funding and so on. Well, long-term planning. You match it with long-term planning, predictable financing. Let us not look outside. We have our business community. They are men, they are women, they are young, they are youth, they are everything. It's in their interest to have a stable country. Then they can make good business. We can do that with them. Other linkages, I've already said that. I think resilience, that really, no, let's not overburden the women. It's great, we're already resilient, but we also like to fluffy, nice, cozy life. We also need that, we like it. Thank you so much. I think this is all I wanted to say. Mainly everything has been said by the previous.
Thank you. Oh, Stella. Thank you so much. And as Mildred said, the youth walk fast, but elders know the way. We really appreciate, thank you for opening up, sharing with us your story. It has really enhanced this webinar, the storytelling as a survivor of violence. And thank you for bringing out that feminine strength of forgiveness. And you rotated around that, forgave, and now took your position as a peace builder. And thank you for ending it by mentioning the fact that we need to begin at the grassroots level, because that's where all this is happening. And I like the fact that you have alluded to the stream that Wahoo was asking, which gender, when we talk of gender mainstreaming, so which stream? There are so many streams, but again, we appreciate the gains you have made, the progress you have made, acknowledging the resources around us, right from your own mother, and mentioning the fact that we have all this potential as women. Why can't we tap on one another and move this wheel forward so that we are able to accelerate realization of the 12 critical areas, including, of course, the SDGs, whose time is running out because we only have a few years to 2030. That was quite enriching, Stella. Thank you so much. You're such a powerful resource for us here in Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, let me say, the difference between Beijing and UNHCR 1325 is that Beijing was talking about stop the wars if you don't want women and children to suffer. But 1325 talks about protecting women in situations of conflict. We need to stop the violence, we need to stop the wars and let them not come back. It's difficult to protect anyone when guns are ablaze. That's all. We see it on TV, you know what it means. Thank you. Sorry for
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for emphasizing on that. And even Mildred mentioned something to do with women in conflict-affected countries. And yeah, our heart goes out to them. And we have even some women of faith who are here. And they're in, we have women from DRC Congo. We hope during the plenary, they'll be able to share their experiences before and even currently within what is happening right now. But our heart goes out to all those women within conflict affected areas. Now, our time is almost running out. There is so much. This is so rich. I'm imagining if it was physical, would really have been able to mine a lot from each other. It's quite rich. I had mentioned that Sister Agatha has joined us. So if you allow me, I'll give Sister Agatha the floor to be able to also share her perspective as the chair of the Africa Women of Faith Network, which is the largest constituency of the African Council of Religious Leaders. She's also the chair of Religions for Peace International Women's Coordinating Committee and the executive director of Cardinal Onayekon Foundation for Peace. Recently, she was honored for her work around peace and dialogue, interfaith dialogue by Religions for Peace, as among the Women of Excellence in Multi-Religious Actions Award. So after Sister, we will now have, we'll move on to the reflection and sharing so that we don't lose out on the many good things that our other participants have. Sister, the floor is yours, and we are so honored to have you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Azila, my sister, and thank you, our great women. Thank you, the honorable speakers. It is a day we are all looking forward to. I apologize for stepping in late. A lot of commitments here and there. So we try to touch here and there also in order to be present everywhere. So the topic we are discussing today is something that is going on globally. We are already aware of this topic. In the past 30 years, we have been hearing about this. And the SDGs are also helping us to pop it up every now and then, every 10, 15, 20 years and the rest of them. So it is the time for us to, look back, begin to assess and evaluate what we have been doing. And I believe that the speakers have done, they have really, really done, justice to the topics that we allocated to them. The only area I would want to focus on, first, is to acknowledge, the facts, the basic facts. One of the key things that, the Belgian Declaration Conference, has really done in the lives of women is that it has made us a little bit more visible than before, a little bit more visible than what it was before 30 years ago. I can see that my internet is not so stable. I feel it. In case you don't hear it, I'm sorry, I may not really help you that much. So women are becoming a little bit more visible. We are, a bit recognized. Instead of just, using us as the normal appendix, even though it is still going on, even up till now, we make up the numbers. The numbers, now. So get me one woman, get me two women, when we have a program so that, it will look as if women are there. While in actual sense, we are not there. But at least for me, that is also something because it shows the fact that we are being recognized in the sense that people know that we exist. And if we truly exist, we should not just exist, for nothing. We should contribute. We should be part of, we should contribute to our existence. We should be that major part of human existence that will bring, better ways of doing things, better ways of living, but better ways of coexisting. So for me, that is one of the key things, that I have seen that this Belgian calling has done. It is bringing to the consciousness of our leaders, of everybody, of men, of even women, that, hey, we don't just have to be there to make up the number. We have to be there to count, to make our voices count. We have to be there to make our impact more, visible and transformative. And that is what is happening gradually with the Belgian conference. And maybe that might be one of the reasons why, even though I have not really seen what I have done, along with other women who were recognized a year ago, for the little contribution we are making in fulfilling and implementing the Belgian Declaration. And maybe that is also one of the reasons why more women are being called upon, to make their inputs and to be part of the solution that will drive us to the kind of future we are all looking forward to. So we have already identified as from the past speakers, what the 12 key areas that we have to really focus on, and see what we can do through the assessment, see what we can do to allow them, to make them, be more impactful in the lives of women. So it is now left for us, it is left for government, it is left for leaders, both religious leaders and our political leaders, to begin to look at it, to see what they can do in those areas. Because most of those things are some of the things that we have to, do collectively, are some of the things that we have to find common solution to. So it is not something that we should be left for women alone. It must be a kind of, joint effort, commitment from all sections, from all dimensions, from all angles, for us to get to where we have to be. But for me, as I said earlier, I can see that we have started the journey. Let me just put it that we have just started the journey. The Belgian Declaration has helped us to start the journey of completely liberating women, the journey of making women count, our feelings, our voices, our existence counts, and also the journey that we too, women, we have a role to play. We have a role to play. And if we do that, then we should be conscious of understanding that we always have a role to play. And in playing those roles, it means that we have to get ourselves prepared. We have to empower ourselves. We have to, get our capacities built and ready for the kind of responsibilities that is being expected of us, for the kind of things that is being expected of us. We have to see what we can do to begin to enhance, to advance our capacities, so that we don't have to lag behind. We don't have to, be delegated. We don't have to be at the background all the time. So, as I said earlier, the journey has just started with the Belgian Declaration. But the journey will not just stop at starting. We have a very long way to go, and we must do it together. We must do it, not women alone. I'm not talking just about women. I'm talking about all of us, men, women, all together. We have to go that road together. We have to walk through that road together. We have to understand that all of us have this role, not just the role of women. All of us have this role to work together, this journey that we have started with the Belgian, and we are assessing it now for the past 30 years to see what we have done. I will not deny that we have not done anything. No, we have done. We have achieved something, somehow a lot, but a whole lot are still out there, which we need to begin to work on, begin to focus on, begin to give more attention. And in doing that, we must work together in order to achieve, the kind of solution, the kind of future we are all looking forward to. Thank you very much. I would prefer to listen more to our great speakers, to educate us, because today is the day for us to hear more from all parts of the world, especially in Africa, on what is happening with women in the area of Belgian Declaration, gender equality, especially as it relates to the SDGs and the rest of them. Thank you so much once again.
Much appreciation. Thank you so much, Sister Agatha. Thank you for that also very nice, powerful presentation. I know you'll come at the end also to provide the closing remarks. Thank you for emphasizing that the journey is on. It's not only women in the bus we also have men, we also have the boys, because you have emphasized this liberation, we have to realize it together as women of Africa. And of course, you have alluded to the fact that a lot has been achieved, but a lot is yet to be realized. Thank you very much, Sister Agatha. Okay. Now I want us to move to the reflection and sharing section, so that it's a moment where, you know, now that we've listened to these very able women panelists and presenters, including our Secretary General, who even in his opening remarks emphasized that as African Council for Religious Leaders, we have a strategic plan, and in it, what is going to enable us realize the aspirations we have placed there is the Ubuntu that one of the panelists was alluding to. So thank you very much. Let me now introduce Ms. Alia Lal Mohammed. Alia is in the Standing Commission on Gender Equality, Religions for Peace International, but very important for us here in Africa, Alia, who is from Mauritius, is a co-chair of the Africa Interfaith Youth Network. African Council for Religious Leaders, as has been mentioned, is in 34 countries. In those countries, we have also constituencies of women of faith. We have constituencies of youth in faith, and the youth come together to form now the African constituency of the youth of faith. The women also have come together to form the constituency of the Africa Women of Faith, led by the co-chairs who are present here. So Ms. Alia, now the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us from Mauritius.
Thank you, Dr. Rosilla. Thank you, distinguished guests and esteemed panelists and speakers. In the context of celebrating the International Women's Day 2025, which indeed revolves around the theme Accelerate Actions, hearing the voices of powerful women today in this session, for me, cast a ray of hope. Sincerely, it brings light at the end of the tunnel. Women's voice is heard and is not merely an echo. So today, women are not here to fill in the gaps or to make the numbers count, but we are here to have a place concretely and have an impact on society at large. So your powerful insights, ladies and gentlemen, have geared us towards understanding on how best we can promote women empowerment and ending the social scourge of gender-based violence or simply violence against women and girls across the globe, and reaffirm today our commitment as enshrined under the Beijing Platform for Action. We have some key highlights and observations from the panelists and the speakers, which I would like to emphasize on. So in the words of Mrs. Wahukara, the Beijing Platform for Action is not an accident. Very important to mention that. And it came at the right moment where the place of women ought to be attributed adequately and effectively. Similarly, in the words of Mrs. Sunita Kaminha, pause and reflect. She asked us to pause and reflect because we did make progress. What are the changes made so far? And yet there is still room for improvement by highlighting the disconnection from theory and practice. She also highlighted preventive measures are key to addressing the underlying causes of gender-based violence. So it's time, crucially, what Mrs. Sunita mentioned, to reposition our understanding of violence against women and girls. This is a strategy in itself. Social norms and beliefs, in the words of Mrs. Mildred Negisa, social norms, beliefs, and practices which must be addressed at roots level. The different barriers, the different types of barriers which block the pathway to full empowerment of women and girls. The main cause of gender gap is left to the visible and invisible barriers. And here, I would like to refer to the glass ceiling issues. We need to redefine how to promote gender equality. We need to take a multifaceted approach to tackle the issue of gender gap. So it's time to reflect into thinking and asserting about how to go about it in practice. So this is the words of Ms. Mildred Negisa. So in the words of Mrs. Stella Sabiti, sharing her personal experience, which was very rich, she highlighted that divine intervention. So for us, Women of Faith Network, which is very important because we need to include faith, which is an integrated approach of including faith in all our programmatic interventions. So in other words, divine intervention, if we tune into God, we will be guided and not misguided. So let us break the barriers both horizontally and vertically. And the words of our dearest sister, Agatha, acknowledge the fact that the Beijing Platform for Action has made women, in her words, I quote, a little bit more visible, ironically, as to what it was 30 years ago. So we are not yet fully recognized, but just a little bit, and thanks to the Beijing Platform for Action. So panelists have raised concerns about the progress made since the past 30 years, which have lapsed. And the gender gap, unfortunately, has widened. And the disparity between male and female leadership and economic participation is still huge. So, ladies and gentlemen, the current lacuna within the institutional framework emphasizes the crucial need to bring about concrete changes to the existing landscape, which confirms, unfortunately, structural violence and discriminatory practices which are systemic. So, one of the panelists mentioned, and we are here today in an era of spiritual restoration. I've loved that, and I agree. So without any further ado, let me just open the floor to the general audience and take some questions, suggestions, and comments from you. And obviously, we want to be empowered through your words and see how we can really bring about concrete recommendations to be able to shift, to do the paradigm shift from women who were disempowered to women and girls who are empowered. Thank you very much. So the floor is yours. Any questions, suggestions, and comments that you would like to raise to our esteemed panelists and speakers? And I think they're all here to take on your questions and suggestions as well. Thank you. Anyone? So we're taking questions from the floor. Yes, Mr. Khalidou Afolabi, the floor is yours.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I would like to appreciate the speakers so far for the insights and the provoking perspectives that they've rendered. I've asked this question before through the chat, but I think since it has not been given attention, perhaps I'll just voice it out. And what I asked then was, considering the global patronage for gender diversity, how do we ensure that the progress that has been made for women's rights is not undone by the patronage? So, because we are in a world now where a man can become a woman, and some of the nuances that are surrounding the conversation are that the place of a woman is endangered by this reality. So how do we ensure that the female species is not endangered? That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khalidou. So anyone from the panel would like to answer? Or we're taking the questions first, and then we can have the answers. We have a few. So anyone from the panel would like to answer the question of Mr. Khalidou, who say that how can we have, I think it's all about adopting the appropriate strategies to be able to prevent from women being endangered. But that question is very vague as well. But let us try to really to get it precise. Anyone would like to answer? So maybe I can ask Ms. Mildred Nagisa if she would like to answer that questions from Mr. Khalidou. Yes, Wahukara.
Thank you.
Wahukara. Sorry, I think Wahukara and then Ms. Mildred.
Okay. All right.
Yes, Mrs. Mahukara.
She needs to unmute. I think she's mute.
Yes. Yeah. Can you please unmute?
Mrs. Waho.
Mrs. Wahukara, can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you properly. Thank you. Please proceed.
Yeah, that is a very fundamental question, this one about patronage. And that's why in my presentation, I was talking about the systemic question. Patriarchy as an architect or architectural social construct has its own perimeters of how it should work, and it has instruments, the socialization we go through, and that's why patronage becomes a key manifestation of how we are socialized in terms of social relations that also reflect in politics, in economics, and even within the religious circles. So the whole question of patronage is the construct of the social relation, which is not equal. And actually, now that I'm speaking on the platform of religion, it is a sin because we are all created in equal positioning, each person predestined with a particular mission. But because of sin, patronage becomes as a way of enhancing superiority complex versus inferiority complex. And that's where the women find themselves. And as I have already put it clearly, is a very systemic question, very inherently well formulated within the well-being of our social fabric. So we must go very intentionally on how to expose it and how to deal with it and engage with it. And now that we have been witnessing actually the threats, that it's not only a threat to the woman, but also a threat to the man, because the basis of who we are is in limbo as we are in this conversation. So for me, this question is very profound and coming to the right forum so that we are able to engage, because empowerment is not an abstraction, and overcoming disempowerment is critical and a responsibility. Actually, is a duty bound responsibility given to every individual, not to allow themselves to be dehumanized, because the human creation has its own manifestation, which we must always continue to express in every day of our lives. So I'm calling upon especially the religious concerns, and I'm glad this is the platform, to begin to see where is the restoration to be located. Because unless human beings are spiritually restored, we will continue speaking this issue in segmentation and in departmentalized arrangement of division of domination and control, because the principality itself is designed so, and the principality is the question which we must address now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to take on all the questions first, and then we'll let the panelists respond to each of the questions. So the second question goes to, I think, Miss Lydia Monique. Miss Lydia, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. This is a great presentation, and I'm very happy to be part of it. My name is Reverend Dr. Lydia Monique. I'm a priest in the Anglican Church of Kenya and the founder of Kareri Widows Organization. And as we talk about that, as we celebrate the 30 years of Beijing anniversary platform, I am delighted because 30 years ago, the Beijing platform focused on drawing attention to the status of widows, of course, as well as all the other women. We have made strides, especially with the International Widows Day, and that is a great gain. But I want to bring to the attention of this platform that widows are still often deprived of their rightful inheritance, even as we talk about women's economic empowerment. Widows are a vulnerable group. Of course, not all widows are vulnerable, but we have vulnerable widows, and when they are deprived of their inheritance and land rights, then they are economically disempowered. Of course, they are also subjected to other harmful practices because of normalized harmful social norms. So I have also, I can't agree more with the speakers, especially I think Ma'am Stella, who has talked about bringing men on board. Of course, all the other speakers have talked about positive masculinities. And I would have liked to see how men have, because we know men are doing a lot for women's empowerment. Maybe we would have had a man, apart, of course, the Director General spoke very powerfully and would have represented men, but what are men doing, especially those at the grassroots, to empower women? And again, when we talk about positive masculinities, we also know that there are negative femininities, which are perhaps even more harmful than negative masculinities. So how are we building positive femininities? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And we took on board your questions and suggestions as well. Very fruitful indeed. So regarding the status of women readers and economic empowerment of women, and the deprivation of inheritance rights of widows, it's very crucial. So we'll allow the panelists to respond to your question later. So let me just ask somebody else from the group, from the chat group, to set forth the question. And maybe we should take on Prince Ibrahim Mukuchele. Yes, Prince Ibrahim, the floor is yours. Can you please set forth the question?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Prince Ibrahim Muchelule. I'm National Youth Leader, Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims, and also a member of African Interfaith Youth Network. And I'm Prince from the only surviving kingdom in Kenya. Now, my question is this: we are celebrating Women's Day, but we can't celebrate we can't celebrate minus touching on the war in DRC and Southern Sudan. What is our role? Because our women there are dying because they're less fortunate. Our young people are being involved. So what's our role as African ACRL? Hello, have you?
Yes, sir.
Are
yes.
you together?
So your question, your question is, what is the role of the African leaders pertaining to the war in DRC, right?
DRC and also Southern Sudan, because the war is still there. And the war is still there. So what is our role? What have we done, or what's our roadmap? Thank you very much. Just want to hear that.
All right, thank you, Prince Ibrahim. Your question is well noted. So I'd like to give the floor to Cornelius. Yes, Cornelius Omunakwa. Your hand still raised up. So if you have any questions, suggestions, or comments to be made, please. Yes.
I'm present. Yeah. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can,
Hello?
Father Cornelius.
Okay. Yes, I want to also congratulate all of you for, especially the women, for this webinar. Is it contribution or question? I think it should be a question. The Nigerian experience. In some of the elections we've had in this country, Nigeria, I discovered that when a woman wants to contest, it is her own fellow women that work against her. Or no, the woman didn't support her, and many others like that. Even in our last problem in the National House of Assembly, all the women in the House of Assembly were against a woman who was talking about, harassment, that she was sexually harassed. So my question is, in as much as we don't want to conclude that is there anything psychologically or anthropologically wrong or that is making women not to support fellow women? But in the open, we talk about women agenda. Why is it that when it comes to critical issues like position, women do support their fellow women? Is there anything fundamentally wrong? Because very often men care about these women more than the fellow. That's my question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cornelius. Are you done, or I think the connection is very bad on your side? Are you still with us, Cornelius? The communication is blurry now. We can't hear him at all. But I've already jotted down the questions from Mr. Cornelius, who said he wants to understand the level of psychological support and all critical issues being extended to women. And I think what he wants to speak about indirectly is about all those harmful practices and social norms and negative beliefs that are not conducive towards women's rights, and how do we go about it from a policy intervention level or even at grassroots level from faith-based organization. So his question is noted. So for now, from the chat box, I would like to read.
Sorry, can I quickly clarify my question, please?
Okay, please proceed.
Okay, because I saw from the intervention of, was it Kara, that it's as if my point was really vague as you declared after raising the question. So what I basically said is that there is a global patronage for gender diversity. And what I mean by that is that there is this advocacy that individuals should have the freedom of choosing their gender. So even if somebody that is biologically a man decides to become a woman, it is becoming allowed globally. I'm now asking the implication of such acceptance for the place of woman in our society. Most especially, remembering a particular instance where a man that was arrested for, I can't recollect the name now, a man that was arrested for sexual assault and was put in a male prison, at a time claimed that he has become a transgender woman and was transferred to female prison, and he ended up sexually assaulting about 3 women. So in consideration of gender diversity, what is the place of, how do we ensure that the place of a woman is not encroached in our society? I hope the question is a bit clear now.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Khalidou. We've taken on board the questions regarding the transgender and those women in prison who are being victim as well from any kind of violence from other women. And we take that on board, and we'll request the panelists to enlighten further pertaining to your question. And I would like, since no hands is raised so far, I would like to read a comment from Mama Shamsa in the chat box. She said, we need a review of the Beijing Declaration, which is quite interesting, so that it fits the current topologies hindering women access to economic and finance empowerment, social and political inclusion. So it's true that the Beijing Platform for Action dates back 30 years ago. Does it need to be revamped? Does it need to be reviewed so that it is not only updated, but it fits in the current existing realities? Though it is a blueprint document, without doubt, the Beijing Platform for Action is a blueprint document. We're still looking at those recommendations and to be able to know how we can concretely bring about not only policy interventions at national level, but global level, and see axes and strategies that can really bring about effective gender equality and let's say to pull down the rate for the GBV prevalence, which is quite high actually across Africa. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'll now leave the room for the panelists to answer the questions. And I will repeat the questions one by one. And if any of those panelists would like to answer, please raise your hand and the floor is yours. So we have a question from Lydia regarding the status of widows and other women and women economic empowerment, whereby widows are being deprived of their inheritance rights in reality. So is it an issue of harmful social norms and practices, or is it a legal issue? And I would like to request any of the panelists which would like to answer the question to come forward so that we can let the room for you to answer. So is it Mildred Negesa who would like to answer the question regarding the status of widows? Thank you very much. Please proceed, Mildred. Thank you. Can you unmute yourself, Mildred? Mildred, you are muted.
Thank you. Now, can you hear me now?
Now it's
Thank you very much. If you may allow me to just take the 3 points from the gentleman. Apparently, we had 3 gentlemen asking the questions, and that is interesting.
Okay.
And of course, the widow inclusion, extremely important, because when we are talking inclusivity, we have to really unpack all the layers of inclusivity, and it's quite extremely important, and we must be intentional about doing that. I would love to answer, I think, our brother, I think Halidu, when he's asking about the patronage and asking again, I don't know why the question of transgender is being made a women's only issue, while transgender actually operates both ways, because there are women who also transition to be men. So now, are those women also taking in the agency of men? I don't know. The men are able to answer it for us. I also want to emphasize a question that was brought in, I think, by Cornelius, when Cornelius talked about women against other women and women being their own enemies. Cornelius, my brother, and to all gentlemen in the platform, I want you to understand that that statement is a patriarchal lie. That men fight all the time. Men do not support each other all the time. The wars that's being talked about by Prince Ibrahim in Sudan, in DRC, are started by men. Men fight in parliaments all the time. Men are on each other's throats all the time, but nobody says that men are their own worst enemy. But when women disagree on something, and remember, women are not homogeneous, they don't have to be, and patriarchal lie is quickly thrown at women to be told that women are their own worst enemies. When we bring in consciousness of understanding the dynamics of gender inequality and patriarchy and how it impacts on gender inequality, we need to understand that the fine print of this kind of conversation is what is pulling women down and pulling women back. Now, I want to now quickly address what I think Prince Ibrahim talked about, the war in the DRC, the war in the Sudan. Prince Ibrahim, my brother, the fact that we are not talking about the ongoing war means that we are turning our faces the other way. Are we collaborating? Are we getting together to raise and amplify the voices of those who are suffering the brunt of the war? Are we infusing our conversations and our policies to the peacekeepers, to the people on the table, negotiating and discussing and politicizing the situations of conflict in this war? Are we being proactive in understanding what's happening in the Sudan, what's happening in the DRC, and therefore calling for strategies to call in for peace? And please, my gentlemen, brothers, remember both wars have been started by men and are being sustained by men. So these men who are their own enemies at this point are the ones bringing this in. My beloved participants, all that I'm saying is that we have to bring in the consciousness of how patriarchy underpins everything that we have discussed for the last 2 hours. And what does that mean when it comes to amplifying the voices and presence of women and girls in these spaces? Thank you, Aliyah. I think I'll stop for now.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've got a good grasp. Thank you for answering all the 3 questions from the audience. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have no further questions, and would Wahukara wish to add something? We have only a few minutes left, but I would still like to give you the chance to respond to those questions briefly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would only go with what has already been put on the table and continue to overemphasize. These are systemic questions. We must address them from their formulation in understanding the interests that they drive and how they drive and why women now are the option to engage with them and be able to resolve them, because they are political questions which we must address politically. It's all a question of how power balancing is already in place and has been there for many centuries. So we are a gifted generation to be able to arise, like I said right from the onset, to begin to rethink where do we begin to restore humanity, to live for the purposes that the human being was created. Because these systems are constructed and created by people, and we all agreed they were made by patriarchy to serve patriarchy. We are saying as women, our spirit is capable to arise, and we have been envisioning alternatives on the ground. Remember what majority of the women do at their household, how they manage their homes, and how they continue to sustain life, sometimes even without resources. And that's why I like saying, we in Africa, the African women, we have refused to die for Africa. We shall live for Africa because we value life. Our system, as we know it, does not value life. We need a system that values life. It's only us women who are able to give it, because that's our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wahukara. So maybe thank you for that insight. As we can see, if there is no change in the mindset, if there is no change in the level of consciousness, and then I would like to join Mildred, what you said, the level of consciousness should change, then the concrete actions will follow, which is a reflection on the level of consciousness of mankind. So thank you very much. And Stella Sabiti, would you like to give us a reflection on those questions quickly?
Oh, just one. Talking about toxic
okay, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Everything my sisters have said, yes. I'd like to add that, you know, anyone who wants to make you fail sees way farther ahead than you can see. In the end, you remain tied like this. So whichever way you want to move, you can't. So even this issue of women sabotaging other women and so on, indeed, like it has just been said, that is part of the toxic masculinity. They will make sure they disempower you to a level that you even think you can't do anything, to the point of you thinking that you're nothing completely. So they don't have to stop you. They do it in such a way that you end up stopping yourself, stopping your own sisters. You do their hard work for them. And it's like that. Even race, it's the same race. Those who are against the Blacks or Africans don't have to hammer us all the time. They just put it in the system, and it is so systemic you don't see it. And in the end, we blame those who are actually imprisoned by the system. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you so much. Merci.
Thank you very much, Stella Sabiti. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I can see we have one hand which is raised, but we are running short of time. Dr. Rosila, can you please remind us about the timekeeping for now? Can we proceed with...
Actually, we are past time, 10 minutes past, and we need to release our interpreters.
Okay.
I don't know whether, is it a comment, Traore? Maybe you could just give him that chance, then read the recommendations, then we have the closing remarks.
Okay, Traore, can you please maybe send your suggestions and comments in the chat box for the time being? Thank you. So, Dr. Rosila, if I may proceed with concluding the reflection and sharing session. And I will briefly go through the recommendations and set forth by the Women of Faith Network and from the African Council of Religious Leaders. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, as faith actors, right, it is imperative that we do come up with concrete, not only strategies, but action plan, whereby we really demonstrate and show our commitment and sincerity towards the Beijing Platform for Action. So the Council of Religious Leaders, and more specifically the African Women of Faith Network, we have come up with a few recommendations, which I would like to read through them. So the first cluster would be the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. So despite regional and national commitments, GBV remains a pervasive issue across Africa. Weak enforcement of legal frameworks, limited survivor-centered approaches, and entrenched cultural norms continue to undermine progress. So our key recommendations are: enforce accountability and justice mechanism, strengthen the implementation of an anti-GBV laws, and ensure survivor-centered access to justice, including legal aid, safe reporting mechanisms, and protection services are given to victims. So invest in community and faith-based interventions, scale up programs that engage religious leaders and local communities and are inclusive of men, boys in shifting harmful social norms and promoting positive masculinities. Third, strengthen faith-based interventions in trauma healing and psychosocial support for survivors. Fourth, expand multi-sectoral partnership, which means increase collaboration with governments, faith institutions, and international organizations to enhance GBV prevention and response. So bridging the gender gap in leadership, this is our second cluster. Women remain underrepresented in leadership across political, religious, and institutional spaces, limiting their influence on critical decision-making processes. So our key recommendations are: first, institutionalize gender-inclusive governance, advocate for gender quotas, mentorship programs, and policy reforms that ensure equal representation of women in leadership positions. Second, strengthen faith-based commitments, encourage faith institutions to adopt gender-inclusive leadership structures, and create pathways for women to lead in religious and community spaces. Third, support women leadership development, invest in leadership, training, networking, opportunities, and advocacy platforms to amplify women's voices at all levels. Our third cluster, advancing women's economic participation. So structural barriers, discriminatory practices, and lack of access to financial resources and other livelihoods assets continue to hinder women's full participation in the economy. So our key recommendations are: first, ensure equal access to economic opportunities, advocate for policies that promote women's access to financial services, credit, and entrepreneurship programs, invest in skills development and education, support vocational training, digital literacy, and market-driven skill programs tailored for women and girls. Third, promote workplace equality and protections. Push for gender-responsive labor laws, equal pay for equal work, and measures to eliminate workplace discrimination. Then the last cluster, which is recognizing women participation in peace building and climate adaptation. Women play critical roles in conflict resolution. We've seen that during the session. resilience building, and climate adaptation, yet their contributions remain undervalued and in national and regional policy framework. So our key recommendation goes: first, institutionalize women participation in peace processes, advocate for women's full inclusion in mediation, conflict prevention, and post-conflict reconstruction efforts at all levels. Second, support women's leadership in climate resilience, invest in initiatives that equip women with climate adaptation skills, including sustainable agriculture and disaster risk reduction. And third, foster interfaith and cross-sectoral collaboration, leverage faith networks to drive inclusive and sustainable peace efforts, ensuring women's voices are at the center of all decision-making processes. So these are our recommendations from the Women of Faith Network and the African Council of Religious Leaders. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to share with you all these recommendations in the hope that we can bring a ray of hope to women who are yet being undervalued for the work and progress they made in their own country. So for the time being, I would like to wrap up that session by saying thank you to each one of you. And please, Dr. Rosila, you can take it forward. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alia, for facilitating this session of reflection and sharing very well. Thank you for capturing the recommendations also very, very well. And as the African Council for Religious Leaders, of course, working with the Women of Faith Network, we will want to ensure that these recommendations at least reach the desks that they're supposed to reach so that we can accelerate realization of these actions. Thank you very much, Alia, co-chair of the Africa Interfaith Youth Network. So at this particular time, I know so many comments were also on the chat box. I hope we are reading them. I came across one from Mama Shamsa where she was suggesting there's need to review the Beijing Declaration so that it fits the topology that we are currently finding ourselves in as women of Africa. So they are very rich and we are going to capture them. And my colleagues, we have all committed that we are going to package all this together and share with you because this is an issue, an area of concern that we have all agreed that we need to push this wheel together. Thank you, Reverend Father Cornelius, Secretary General of National Interreligious Council, for being here. So at this time, it's my, again, humble opportunity to usher in Sister Agatha Chikeleo, the co-chair of Africa Women of Faith Network, to provide the closing remarks, even as I appreciate all of you, esteemed participants, all of you esteemed panelists, and we request that after we listen to the closing remarks, we all keep our cameras, put our cameras on for a picture to be captured so that it forms part of the reports we'll share with you. Thank you very much. The floor is now yours, Sister Agatha.
Thank you very much once again. Let me thank all of us on behalf of the Africa Women of Faith Network Religions for Peace for this wonderful session, for this important session, for this enlightening and enriching session. I feel so happy and I feel so enriched participating in this program. You know, when I keep quiet and listen to my fellow women speak, I'm like, oh, wow, 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 wow. I feel so happy, I feel so proud, you know, and I only pray and hope that this tempo, this spirit, this zeal and enthusiasm will be translated into the effort we are making towards achieving our Beijing Declaration, the SDG number 5, and the rest of them. You know, if we pull this tempo there, I bet you we will achieve it in 2 years. We will achieve it. You will see that 30 years we wasted so much time achieving very little, very, very little. But if we put the kind of spirit I have seen here into proper action, we will achieve much, much more. So I beg all of us, let us sit up. Let us wake from slumber. Let us look at those 12 critical areas that we have lagged behind, that we have not been able to measure up with to see how we can begin to attend to them. And in doing all this, let us not forget this. One of the participants from Nigeria asked a very important question, and for me, that is very, 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 very key. And I also, get so sad when I see things like that outplaying, and it does outplays every now and then. My dear sisters and brothers, there is no way you can fight your enemy by being your own enemy. You can't fight the enemy. You can't fight whoever. You can't stand up. When you are the one, you are the obstacle yourself. And I keep telling our women, I keep telling ourselves, yes, women liberation. Oh, yes, I champion it. I'm at the forefront. But first, let me start liberating myself. My mentality, my understanding, my everything. By the time we begin, to do that, I strongly believe that we will go somewhere. But when we keep pushing it, yes, it's there, it's we, yes, they manipulate, but are they manipulating trees, for goodness sake? Are they not manipulating human beings that have, can't we think? Can't we understand? So I completely understand all that. These are strategies, these are patriarchal, whatever. But if we are determined from the kind of spirit I have seen here, if we are determined to come above it, to say, hell no to this, we will say no to that. And you will see that nobody will drag us back. Nobody will fight, can be able to withstand us. So please, let us continue to work harder. I felt so ashamed, with Father's example of Nigeria in the parliament. I felt so ashamed of those women there. I felt so ashamed of them. And I wish I would have the opportunity to meet them and tell them my piece, And these are the kind of women who are bringing shame to us. And it's quite unfortunate. But what do? We are all women. But please, let us not forget that a whole lot of women are out there championing, working day and night, to see that we are where we're supposed to be. Let our focus be there. Because if we want to get all women on our side before we can do anything, that will never happen. Because there's no way you are going to get yes from everybody. But for those of us who have seen the need and who wants to, move forward with this, let us form that formidable force that will give us a kind of, future response and, the kind of future we want to live, both for ourselves and those that will come after us. So once again, I thank all of us. Once again, I encourage all of us. Once again, I call upon all of us. And when I mean by all of us, I'm not talking about women alone, mind you. I'm not talking about, as we all have said here, I'm not talking about women alone, men also, female also. We have to work together in this because all hands must be on deck. We must work together in this aspect of making our lives, our very existence count. We must work together. And that is what the regime declaration is all about. That is what the SDG, gender equality, is talking about. And we have to come together to make it happen, to make it a reality. Thank you so much. But let us not forget that the journey has just begun. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Agatha. So now I request all participants, please let's switch on our cameras so that a picture is taken. We really appreciate you. This has been so rich. Sarah, are you okay with the cameras that are on?
Yes, please. We keep them on for some moments as I take the screenshot.
All right. So at least you have seen Sarah. I know she's sent quite a number of communication to, to many of you. Sure. This is Sarah, and we have the team of the technical staff. They're all here. Ashad is here from Peace. We have Martin, we have Lydia, Environment. We have institutional strengthening, manager or advisor also here. So we are all here. And thank you, Africa Women of Faith Network, for putting all this together. Thank you,
Yeah.
our
Thank you. It's done
panelists.
from my end.
All right. Thank you and have a good day from where you are. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye, everyone.
Gambia, it was
Bye.
great to have you here. Bye-bye.